Okay, and we are live. Got a couple of people coming in. Hello, everybody. For those who already joined us, welcome to this GxP-CC webinar today. We are talking about AI and machine learning validation framework in this session. And thank you all for spending the time with us today. Wherever you are on the globe, even if it's afternoon, morning, night, thank you all for joining. I'm Julian. I'm a consultant here at GxP-CC, and I will be your host for this session. And with this small introduction, I'd like to welcome my colleague and speaker for today's webinar, Thomas Collum, who is a senior consultant from computerized system validation at GxP-CC, and he will be presenting the AI and machine learning validation framework to you today. So with that out of the way, we got a couple of administrative things to share. We're going to run a live Q&A part at the end of this webinar, so feel free to post any questions you have in the Q&A tab that you can see on the right. We go through many as we can, and if time is running short, we will gather all unanswered questions and get back as soon as possible to you. But you can also send us any questions, inquiries to info@gxp-cc.com. And for those of you who are wondering, all questions are going to be anonymous. On top of that, we are going to record this webinar session for quality control. And we will decide later on if we make this webinar available on demand. But this will go out via email to each and every one of you. So you will be informed if you want to catch up later again on some certain parts of this webinar. Yeah, I think that's it. And so without further ado, let's get started. And Thomas, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Julian, and welcome everyone also from my side. Thank you very much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. I hope after this everyone can go into the weekend and enjoy the weekend. And let us start with the topic. So today's topic is AI and machine learning validation framework. And the idea is that we start with a short introduction with a definition of AI and machine learning. We look at some examples and look what regulatory guidance is available. Then we'll have a look at the technical background, understand what an AI machine learning algorithm is, and then we'll see how we can develop something like that and put it into a validation framework. At the end, we'll also have a look at the challenges that we cannot look into detail here and do a short summary. So let us start with the definition. And here we are out of luck because there is no one unique definition of AI or machine learning. So I was so free and listed here the definition that the FDA is using in their action plan. So for artificial intelligence, they say it is broadly defined as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. This definition is not very good to work with because it's tautological in nature. And artificial intelligence is something that makes an intelligent machine. Difficult to define something with that. So let's look at the machine learning instead. And machine learning is an AI technique to design and train software algorithms so they can learn on data and act on data. And there are two ways to do this. One is to have a static algorithm coming out of it. The algorithm is locked offline, or you have an adaptive algorithm coming out of it, which will learn over time and keep learning. We'll see later that the adaptive way is currently not really supported by the regulatory framework. So we'll focus on the machine learning definition as it gives more information, and have a look at two examples. Example number one is an initiative of Google Health. Short introduction, this is not in productive use. It's far from it. But the idea is there is a certain kind of blindness that is caused by diabetes. And there is a symptom that you can see, and that is that some blood vessels in the eye, in the retina, leak out. And you can see this in the macular region, the yellow spot in the eye. So when you want to see this, you'll take a photo of the retina and look whether there's any blood in this yellow spot. This is usually done by medical doctors who have to be trained for this and have to do the procedure each time they do the check. And there's a serious limitation here, so there's real value of doing this image processing automatically through an AI. And the ideas here are really to have this picture, have it analyzed by an AI, and with that, being able to make more use of the analytics. And going a step further, Google is anticipating that you might even do this with your smartphone, so you don't even need the machinery around this. This is, with current regulatory guidance, a bit difficult, but it shows very well the strength that AI can bring to something like that. And it's also a great example because AI tends to do pretty good on image processing and can be used for similar cases as well. We continue with the second example. The idea for this example actually comes from a European Union discussion paper where they look at potential use cases. And one of the use cases would be pharmacovigilance. A short introduction. The idea behind pharmacovigilance is to analyze adverse effects, collect them, detect them, assess them, monitor them, and prevent them from happening if possible. And the core part of that is signal detection, where you look, okay, what kind of adverse effects are reported and can we categorize them? So, for example, somebody said, oh, I have a headache after taking the drug, or something more serious. And the way you get the data there is you get text, which is formatted in some way, not necessarily a unique way. And then you have to read out of that what type of adverse effects that has. And here again, the AI would be helpful because this, of course, if humans have to do it, there's a lot of work in there. And AI is actually pretty good at natural language processing. So it is feasible to look at the text you get and categorize it into adverse events, adverse effects. So I hope this gives already an introduction what you can do with AI, how useful it can be. Now the question is, what do the regulators say? And the answer is they know AI is important. They have different initiatives how to deal with AI. For example, the USA has released an action plan where they plan to set up a framework for that, and guidance papers for software as a medical device. But there is no clear framework on this. Similar also with Europe, which only has an action plan, MHRA, the same. Health Canada actually has published a good machine learning practice document, but that is also very lean. And the Danish Medical Agency, we have actually a suggested criteria draft that goes a bit more into detail. But overall, we don't have clear regulatory guidance on this. So we have to fall back to the usual computer system validation principles. There is, however, a bit of guidance from the industry. So there's a special interest group or multiple special interest groups in ISPE who try to set something up here. And there's also, on a more academic side, an initiative from Xavier Health, that's a university in the US, who are pretty determined to bring some more guidance in here. So far we see AI has a lot of opportunities, but we don't have regulatory guidance yet. And now that we have this background, we can look at the technical side of things. What is AI? How does it work? And we are starting here with a pretty big abstraction, and that is AI in the end is a computer program. And any computer program you can visualize as you have an input, then you have an algorithm that is doing something, and you have an output. And in the classical way, the idea is you have a developer who develops the algorithm, and then it's static and stays that way. The big thing that is now changing with AI is the algorithm is no longer completely static, but there are some variable parameters in there. So instead of just having input and output, we have some parameters that can be trained. And there's no longer just one developer who says, okay, this is how the algorithm works, but you also have a training where you give the thing data and it learns by itself how to set these parameters. Good, this is pretty abstract. So let's continue with an example to make this more clear. And it's a pretty simple example, so I hope everyone can follow. And that is grocery shopping. So imagine you go to a shop and you want to buy apples and strawberries. You buy X apples for €1 each and Y strawberries for €2 each. And now the question is, how much money do you have to pay? Good. Classically, that is pretty easy. So if I buy 5 apples for €1 and 2 strawberries for €2, then that costs €9. That's a classical algorithm. Not much to think about. But we want to stay with this simple example anyway and look how AI could tackle this. And as we have seen in the more abstract model, we need to introduce some kind of variable parameters. And here they are, A and B. So instead of knowing the price 1, 2 and writing the algorithm as such, we'll just replace the cost with parameters, let's say A and B. And we also give it some training data, which somebody already calculated or which we know from some reason. Good. At this point, we cannot really do a lot with this AI model. So what we need to do now is to train the AI model to be able to calculate the cost here. So we have to start with some A and B, and we'll set it as 5 and 7. Just as an example, we have to start with some random, something random. And now the idea is to train the model. So we feed the model the training data. We buy 5 apples and 1 strawberry, feed it to the model, and our brilliant AI says, okay, this costs €32. But from the training data, we already know that should only cost 7 euros. So obviously this AI is not very intelligent, or it does something wrong. So we have to tell it that it's doing something wrong. And here we need an update rule, how to update these variable parameters. So I haven't defined a great rule. I'm just using the rule presenter's intuition. So my intuition says, okay, 32 is much too high. We have to get those parameters down. So let's try 3 and 4. And now we iteratively keep training the AI. We go with 3 and 4, take the second data point. We buy 1 apple and 5 strawberries. The algorithm says this costs 25, but it should be 11. We are better than last time, but still pretty bad. So we apply the update rule and say, this is too high. My intuition says it should be less, so let's try 2 and 2. We do the same thing, take the third data point and see, okay, this is costing 14 and it should be 11. This is already much, much better than we were before, but still not quite there. So in this case, we would still continue learning this AI. And if we continue this and continue this and continue this, at some stage it will give pretty good results. So since we don't want to train this AI to the end, we'll stop at this point. And I'll ask the rhetorical question, would any sane person use this AI to solve this problem? And the answer is no, because we know the apple is costing 1 euro and the strawberry is costing 2 euros. We can just write down the algorithm. Why use the whole training and AI, which at this point has worse results than the classical algorithm and is much more difficult to introduce. So then the question is, why use AI at all? And the answer to that is, if you don't know how the inner workings of this algorithm are, then AI gets really good. And to illustrate this, we are looking at the use case of image recognition. And I'll start with this image here, and whoever is browsing the internet from time to time might have come across a site where the website doesn't believe him quite that he's human and asks you to solve some kind of picture puzzle or something. For example, here, the website would ask, please identify the traffic lights on this picture. So the picture is the input, and we as humans are pretty smart. At least I think so. Here, I'm smart enough to identify the 2 traffic lights in the tiles that are marked with 1. Why do the thing? Because we are creating training data here. And here we see a bit more how AI can be useful, because yeah, the example with the grocery shopping, we pretty much know how to solve that. But if you have to tell a computer what does a traffic light look like from different angles, in different shades, in different sizes, then the computer, yeah, it's a difficult problem. You could draw circles and look for colors, but it's very difficult to design something like that. So this would be an example where the AI, the machine learning, is much more useful. What is pretty clear is that we will not be able to solve this with our nice model of ax plus by. That is too simple. So our AI algorithm, this static F part here, needs to be something more complex, more sophisticated. And I want to present here one of the most commonly used ones, and that is artificial neural networks. So going from the most abstract part, inputs, variable parameters, outputs, what we are looking at here is to replace this core algorithm F with some kind of scalable solution. And the idea here is to look at nature. How does a brain work? And the brain is built up out of different neurons that are connected somehow. So in a way, to visualize what we are doing here, we have this network in the middle where we have inputs. These inputs are somehow go into some kind of calculation, and this gives outputs. And the idea here is that what is variable here is the weight of each of these connections. Good. Now we have a nice picture. Now we have to go back to something that is actually easy to calculate. And down there you can see the mathematical way to express that. So we have some function and so some matrix vector multiplication. And I see I've made a slight mistake there, but that's not so bad. So what we get in the end with a neural network is some algorithm that is pretty simple and a lot of matrix entries, which basically represent the learning status of the network. Good. Now we have identified, okay, there's a some kind of calculation rule, some kind of algorithm we can use. And the second thing we need is an update rule. For our toy example, the update rule was, okay, Thomas thought that is a good idea to set the parameters that way. That, of course, is not feasible for proper learning. We need to have some kind of update rule, and this is called backpropagation. Yeah, and with that, you can update those weight matrices, and the algorithm is learning. And does this bring something? Yes, it's highly scalable because you can change the number of layers of these blue points and also the number of blue points. And what we have seen in previous implementations is these are pretty good at image recognition, speech recognition, process control, natural language processing, and a lot of other use cases. So they are very versatile and bring great results. So they are a pretty good choice to use. And they are so good that they are also known under different names. So if somebody wants to tell you that there are a lot of these blue layers, then he'll say, okay, I have a deep learning method because it's deep. It has a lot of layers. And these deep learning networks are very good at, at complex pattern recognition. Or it could be that you have a convolutional neural network. Convolution is a mathematical function that basically adds a filter layer in front so that you can make use of geometric properties. For example, if you look at an image, it might make sense to not just look at one pixel as input, but also look at what is around this one pixel. So those are just two variants. I also don't expect anyone to fully understand neural networks from just this slide. It's just important to know, okay, this is a versatile part. And in the end, if you abstract it, you just have these variable learning parameters, and it's some algorithm, some intelligent person has thought of. Good. I hope everyone is still with us. Now that we've looked a bit at the technical background and what is happening on the algorithm side of this, we want to have a look how we can put that into a validation framework. And to start with that, before we say, okay, this is our rigid model, how we put that, we'll just go then naively and look how would you develop an AI. And as so often, we are starting with a business case. So somebody is coming and says, oh, I have a great idea what we could solve with an AI, my grocery shopping problem. Okay, if he starts with that, probably it's not a good idea to use the AI. But maybe he wants to solve image recognition, and then it might be a good idea. But different to other software developments, we also start with a set of data, because it has to be clear from the beginning that we need this data to feed the AI to make sure that the AI learns how to cope with things. The next step then is to select the model. We already discussed the neural networks. There are also other models. So for some things, it might be better to have a Bayesian network or something else. That depends on the use case, and you will need an AI expert to really guide you through that. What would be the most meaningful model? But it's not just the model we need here. We also need to set our expectations. In the end, an AI will learn, and an AI will always fail. There will always be cases where the AI gives the wrong answer or says, yeah, this is the answer, but I'm only 70% sure. So we already need to select right in the beginning, when is this AI acceptable? How good does it have to perform? We need to set this now so we don't start testing and then set the acceptance level due to our results, but set it beforehand. Good, let's say in our example, we selected an artificial neural network. We know our acceptance criteria. The next thing is to set the model parameters or model specifications here. So that would be in the neural network example, for example, how many layers do you have? How many neurons do you have? So how many of the blue points do you have? What is the learning rate? And you also have to start with some kind of initial learning status, an initial variable parameter. For example, in the grocery shopping example, we said A should be 6 and B should be 7 because we had to start somewhere. Good. Now we have the model set up. It's ready to run. So we need to train it. And for the training, we take a subset of the data we have and feed it to the model. And then we apply the update rule, and we feed it to the model and apply the update rule, and so on, until we see that the model is performing reasonably well. Good, so far so good. The model now is trained to a certain degree. It is doing well on the training data, but of course we don't just want the model to be good on the training data. The model should also be good on some new case that it has never seen. So let's give the model a new case. That is, we take another subset of the data that is not overlapping with the training data, because we just want to give new cases for testing, and we're testing the AI. Good. Now the model, so our AI algorithm, gives us some result. And now the acceptance criteria come in, and we have to see, does it perform well enough, or doesn't it perform well enough? If it doesn't perform well, then we have to update the parameters. So, for example, add additional layers or add additional neurons, or we just start with a different initial weight contribution, because that makes a difference as well. And then we rinse and repeat until at some stage our test says, okay, our model is good. And when the test says the model is good, we can deploy the model. So this is, without any great validation, already what we would do if we wanted to deploy an AI model. How does this fit into the normal validation framework? So if you have anything to do with computer system validation, you will think this. A V model starting with user requirements, going to the function, and it's going to step by step to the configuration. And we do exactly this in the core application, because usually the AI doesn't stand on its own, but there is some kind of business application around it. So that is not quite enough to act on it yet. The second thing we need, business case, is data. So we have some kind of data, we have acquired that, and we are splitting this data set into three. The training data and the test data we already know from how we develop an AI, but we also want to have some kind of small set of business test data, so we can do an overall OQ and PQ. Good. And what is missing now is the AI part, and that is coming out of the functional specifications. And here this is formalized what we. Sorry, my headset decided to switch off. So we are doing what we would be doing anyways, just rigorously documenting it. So we are writing what do we want from the model, how do we design the model, and then we go through the improvement cycle of putting the parameters, training the model, testing the model. If it doesn't work, rinse and repeat. When the test is successful, we are very happy and feed, and then we log this model in the current state and go back to the core application and do our business testing. So we are doing our OQs and our PQs and see whether this AI solution fits into the whole system, fits into the whole process. Good. So that would be the idea, this extra layer, how to make sense of AI, but it's not quite that easy. There are a lot of challenges, and on the next slide, we'll go through some of them, and we won't be able to address all of them, but maybe you can have part of that in the Q&A session afterwards. So the first challenge that is very obvious is the data management. Usually, if you develop an algorithm, you just have data as some test data, and data is used somewhere, but it's not integral part of the algorithm. With AI, it's different. The training data especially is integral part of the model design. So we need to look out, where did we get the data? Is it reliable? So maybe just screening the internet for data is not the best basis to build up your data model. And that can also be interesting if you subcontract data, for example. You would have to do a qualification of the supplier of data, maybe. Then the data might be biased. We had the example of pharmacovigilance pharmacovigilance, sorry. And there it could be that all the data we fed the model is based on man, on adverse effects on man. And now, for whatever reason, the drugs have a different effect on women. Yeah, then the model will not perform. It will be biased. So, and then, of course, you have the typical things. You have to control the storage. And here we also need version control to really know what did the model train on. And then you also have other things to look out for. So are you allowed to use the data at all? Do you maybe have privacy concerns? Patient data, for example, shouldn't just go anywhere. Is there something about confidentiality or labor laws? Could your boss look at how much did you work or something? That might be a concern. So data is really the core and center here. The second big challenge we have is uncertainty. We are used to normal algorithms. You give something to the algorithm and you will get a certain answer. You buy something and you will get a certain answer how much it costs. Not with AI. AI would say more, okay, based on everything I know, I'm 90% sure that this is correct. And we need to know how to deal with that. So we really have to assess the acceptable level of uncertainty and mitigate it. So, for example, with pharmacovigilance, if you look at a common adverse event, then this uncertainty might balance out with the uncertainty anyways. But if we say, okay, we are only 99% certain and some adverse effect is coming up once in 100,000, then this level of uncertainty is not okay. And here we really have to consider, does a human have to look on the data as well? Or can the AI run by itself? You have to have continuous monitoring and you might introduce an alert system. So if the AI says, yeah, I'm 60% sure that I'm right, maybe a human should look again. And here, in defense of the AI, keep in mind a human isn't perfect, especially with more complex things. So if an average human is certain by a factor of 70%, we cannot expect the AI to be 100% certain. So that might be part of the risk consideration. The third challenge is a very typical one, and that is the validation qualification of application and infrastructure. So one thing to think about is, do we want to do this on premise or in the cloud? But then you really need to have those supporting systems. So the core application needs to be validated. All the infrastructure needs to be qualified. What about the storage of the data and so on and so forth? And also you have additional supporting systems. So do I have a test management system that can actually properly document these iterative tests we are doing? Do we have a document management system that can really provide you with a where you can really store the results? And then one fourth challenge I want to bring here is change management. So this is a point from the beginning. What you can do, of course, is instead of deploying an AI and leave it untouched, you can train it while it's working. But that is currently not really possible with regulatory rules because we would be out of control with our change management. What would be the consequences if we update the AI and now the AI suddenly tells people they have cancer? that's not acceptable. So we are with offline models where we are following usual change process. And here it's also important to have that monitoring in place and have the version control of everything, especially the data. There are other challenges as well, for example, unexplainability. It's very difficult to explain the inner workings where a normal program, maybe a second programmer could look at the program and say, yeah, this algorithm makes sense. That's much more difficult here. So, coming to an end, a summary. We started with a few examples and saw AI is worth considering and is worth using. It gives significantly better results for complex programs, and those cannot be achieved with classical algorithms. So it makes sense to use AI, and there's no way around it. The second thing to take out of it is the algorithm is qualitatively different. So we have things we don't have in a normal algorithm: uncertainty, probabilistic solutions, reliance on data, and so on. And this leads to this point that the common validation framework is not really enough to validate AI. So you have to add this additional layer where you really look at the algorithm, look at the data, look at the parameters, and have this iterative cycle of training and testing. The bad news at this point in time is that the regulatory guidance is not very far. So here it's better to look at industry guidance, see what the ISPE is doing, see what some other AI entities are doing. And the fourth takeaway is there are a lot of challenges, and you really have to look at these challenges at the beginning. So what you don't want is to be in the middle of an AI rollout and then say, oh, there's patient data. We can't really use that, and all the work we put into the AI is now gone. So those potential showstoppers have to be addressed very early in the process. That, of course, should be the case ideally also with other rollouts, but here we are in a new venue that we don't know as good as normal validation. And the second thing is make sure you know you have all the supporting validation and qualification framework in place. What you also don't want is to realize in the middle, okay, now I have to print out a million times million neural network matrices, and I don't really know how to use that. So test management, document management, data management, that has to be in place. Good. And with this, almost in time, I took a few minutes longer. I want to thank you for your participation and open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. You were cut off. You said you wanted to take, or you did take some notes. Is that correct?
Sorry, who did?
You said you were cut off while saying.
Okay. I was cut off very not long, right?
No, just for 1 or 2 words.
Okay, good.
All right, good. So thank you all. Now we have an open floor for Q&A. We already have one question ready for you, Thomas. And this is more or less a general question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your vision in this sector going forward with AI and machine learning, especially when we're talking about the regulatory industry?
So the vision, so what we've seen from the examples, and there are lots of examples, complex pattern recognition is very important in a lot of fields and can really bring benefits. The really important thing here is to develop a framework. So we can use AI, which is really important, but not really everyone just doing what he or she wants, but having a controlled way of going forward. So uh, a framework, as I presented earlier, which is also kind of similar to what ISPE working group is also discussing. Um, if we could get something like that as regulatory guidance, that would be great because then we could start running. Then we could really develop those applications. And I think we do have we are in the comfortable situation that we already know that AI can be very helpful because it is used in other industries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I hope that gave a little bit of insight on what we actually think from a consulting point of view. And the takeaway is build your framework and make sure you have a use case. Cool. I have another question,
Mm-hmm.
and this is also from the audience. And it is asked if AI validation is anywhere relevant to method validation. And I believe with method validation, we are talking about chemical, physical, and biological analytics.
Good. So here I have to admit I'm coming from computer system validation, so my knowledge on method validation is a bit more shallow, but of course it can be a tool to use. In method validation, you do have complex patterns that need to be analyzed, and it actually also fits the AI capabilities almost better than what we have with computer system validation, because you often have some kind of acceptable range of data of values you can look at. So if the AI comes in and says, "Okay, I can give you only a range of answers," so you have this probabilistic uncertainty. That actually works well with method validation, where you have all those um, all those reality factors in there where you don't have those exact numbers. So yes, I can see this being helpful for method validation, but I'm not deep enough in there to say exactly how.
Yeah, and I think maybe I can give my 2 cents on this too. I think
Mm-hmm.
the problem with the method validation in the regulatory industry is the connection to the regulatory affairs. So if you have regulatory bodies that you're working with, I think implementing anywhere AI, you need to have a strong framework as well, which we talked about before, to make sure all the bodies are on board with what you submit for them when you maybe want to apply for pharmaceutical approval or anything. And I think it could be a big player, but at the moment, due to having regulatory affair really being a stringent process, it's maybe not as relevant as we would wish.
Yeah, and we also see there you have, I mean, if you look at the whole discussions with AI, you have certain people from the FDA who really, really try, give their input there, but it's always difficult to know what the whole FDA is thinking about it without having a proper guideline.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Thomas. For now, this is it from the question side. So thank you all again for participating in today's webinar session about AI and machine learning. I can just repeat myself. Feel free to send us any inquiries or question. But as I'm just saying this, we have a follow-up question. And let me just read this so I can translate it to normal human speech. Okay, so this question is about acceptance criteria. It is asked for the data set we want to run in AI. How can we set their acceptance criteria? I hope that came
Yeah,
around
so
understandable.
I'm also looking at the question here, and it isn't as badly readable as you make it.
Okay. I
So
apologize.
so to the question with the acceptance criteria, there you really need the process expert. So if you have an AI developer, he cannot tell you, is it good enough to be fine in 99% of cases? Is it good enough to be good in 80% of cases? That is really not something that can be given by the AI developer. There, you really have to look at what do you need to achieve, what are those acceptable results, and make a risk assessment. Look, for example, with a diabetes, a blindness through diabetes. If people self-diagnose, then it might be acceptable that they sometimes have an additional false positive and go to the doctor. That might be better than not going to the doctor and it not being found. But that is not something we can answer very good from AI side. That needs to come from business or process side.
Okay. I hope that put in some clarification for your question. Yeah, I think that's it for today. We're probably going to call it quits. I was mentioning to feel free to use any of our contact points to get inquiries or questions. Make sure you have some sort of relationship to the webinar you're asking the question, because that's not the only webinar we had in the past. So if you're sending us anything to info@gxp-cc.com, make sure you mention which webinar it is so we can direct the questions to the according personnel. And other than that, I don't have anything to add. Thomas, do you want to get some closing words in?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone who joined today. As Julian said, feel free to contact us. We are happy to answer. And I wish everyone a nice weekend.
Thank you. And for that, I will stop the webinar. Thank you all and see you next time.